I always knew I wasn't the favorite. I made peace with that. But watching them do it to my son, watching that same pain on his face, I couldn't take it anymore. Update at the bottom. I've been lurking on this sub for years, reading stories that felt painfully familiar. I always told myself my situation wasn't bad enough to post about. That I was overreacting. That this is just how some families are. But last weekend, something happened that I can't shake, and I need to get this out. I always knew I wasn't the favorite. I made peace with that. But watching them do it to my son, watching that same pain on his face, I couldn't take it anymore. Let me start from the beginning. The backstory. I'm the oldest of 2 sons. My younger brother is 3 years behind me. From my earliest memories, there was always a difference in how we were treated. I know every family has its dynamics, and I spent decades telling myself I was imagining things or being too sensitive. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. When my brother and I were kids, he got the new toys. I got the hand-me-downs or nothing at all. When he wanted to play sports, my parents paid for equipment, camps, private coaching. When I showed interest in music, I was told we couldn't afford lessons. I found out years later that my parents had spent over $2,000 that same year on my brother's baseball gear. College came around. My brother got his tuition paid in full. All 4 years. Plus living expenses. Plus spending money. Me. I got a pat on the back and, "You're responsible, you'll figure it out." I worked 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. I graduated with debt that took me a decade to pay off. My brother graduated debt-free with a new car waiting for him, a graduation gift from our parents. When my brother got married, my parents helped with the down payment on a house. When I got married 3 years earlier, we got a card with $100 in it and well wishes. I never confronted them about any of this. Not directly. I didn't want to be the bitter older son who couldn't let go of childhood resentments. I told myself that keeping score was petty. That I should be grateful for what I did have. That comparing myself to my brother would only make me miserable. So I made peace with it. Or at least I thought I did. I built my own life. I worked hard. My wife and I scraped together a down payment for our own home. We built our careers. We created something without their help, and I was proud of that. I told myself the distance was healthy. That I had moved past needing their approval. Then my son was born, and everything changed. The brief hope. 8 years ago, my wife gave birth to our son. Something shifted in my parents that I had never seen before. Suddenly, they wanted to be involved. They drove hours to visit. They insisted on babysitting. They showered him with gifts and attention. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of the family. Like the favoritism was finally behind us. Like maybe being grandparents was different than being parents. Maybe they had grown. Maybe they had changed. Those early years were good. My parents came to every birthday party. They showed up for school events. They took my son to the park, to the zoo, to get ice cream. My wife's parents lived far away and couldn't visit often, so my parents became the primary grandparents in my son's life. I watched my father play catch with my son in our backyard, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized was tight. I watched my mother read him bedtime stories with a warmth I barely remembered from my own childhood. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were different now. My son adored them. He would count down the days until Grandma and Grandpa visited. He kept their photos on his nightstand. He made them cards and drawings constantly. For Grandpa, he'd write in his shaky first-grade handwriting, "I love you to the moon." For 3 years, my son was their world. Then my brother had a son. The shift. 3 years ago, my brother and his wife had their first child. A boy. And overnight, I mean literally overnight, everything changed. The visits stopped. The calls became less frequent. When my parents did come around, all they could talk about was the new baby. Every conversation centered on my nephew's first word, his first step, his first smile. My son would try to show them something, try to get their attention, and they'd give him a distracted pat on the head before turning back to coo over pictures on their phone of the baby. For 3 years my son was their world. Then my brother's son was born and mine became invisible. The same pattern. The same favoritism. Just 1 generation later. The gifts changed first. Christmas used to mean a pile of presents for my son. Now he gets a gift card while my nephew gets a room full of toys. Birthday parties used to be events my parents planned for weeks. Now they can't make it to my son's birthday but somehow always find time for my nephews. I asked them once to babysit so my wife and I could have a date night. "We're too tired," they said. "Maybe next month." That same week, I found out from my brother that our parents had babysat his son 3 times in the previous 2 weeks alone. The excuses were always ready. The new baby needs more attention. Your son is older, he understands. We have to help your brother. You know how hard new parents have it. Besides, you've always been more independent. There it was again. That word. Independent. The same word they used when they refused to help me with college. The same word they used when they couldn't contribute to my wedding. The same word that really meant, you're not the one we choose to help. The pattern repeats. I watched it happen like slow motion. The exact same dynamics playing out 1 generation down. My brother remained the favorite, and now his son was the favorite grandchild. My son was becoming what I had been, the older one who doesn't need as much attention, the one who should understand, the one who has to make do with less. The comparisons were constant. My nephew was so advanced for his age. My nephew was so special. My nephew had my grandmother's eyes and my grandfather's smile and somehow, inexplicably, resembled every beloved family member who had ever lived. My son started to notice. Kids aren't stupid. They pick up on these things. My son began asking questions I couldn't answer. Why did Grandma cancel our plans again? Why wasn't Grandpa at my recital when he was at Cousin's birthday? Why does Cousin always get better presents? I deflected. I made excuses for them. I told him grandparents are busy sometimes. I told him his cousin was younger and needed more help. I told him that how much someone loves you isn't measured in gifts or visits. I hated myself for those lies. Then, 6 months ago, it happened. The question I had been dreading. My son came to me after another cancelled visit. He was quiet in a way that worried me. He sat on the edge of my bed and looked at me with eyes that held something no 7-year-old should have to carry. "Dad," he said, "why don't Grandma and Grandpa love me anymore? Did I do something wrong?" I couldn't answer. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. Because in that moment, I was looking at myself. I was 7 years old again, wondering why my brother got new things and I got hand-me-downs. Wondering what I had done to deserve less. Wondering if I could somehow earn my parents' love if I just tried hard enough. My son asked me, "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby, you didn't. Your grandparents did. They did the same thing to me 30 years ago." I pulled him close and held him. I didn't have words. I just held my son and cried silently into his hair while he clung to me, confused and hurt and not understanding why his grandparents had forgotten about him. That night, I talked to my wife. I told her everything, not just about my son, but about my childhood. Things I had never fully articulated. The unfairness I had swallowed for decades. The wounds I thought had healed but had only scabbed over. She held me and listened and told me something I needed to hear, that I deserved better too. But still, I didn't act. I told myself I would give my parents one more chance. That maybe I was being too sensitive. That maybe if I talked to them, they would see what they were doing. Then came last weekend. The breaking point. It was my nephew's 3rd birthday party. A big affair, of course. My parents had helped plan it for months. Rented venue, professional decorations, hired entertainment. The works. My son was excited to go. Despite everything, he still loved his grandparents. He still hoped. He had spent hours the night before making a drawing for my father. A picture of the 2 of them fishing, something my father had done with him exactly once, 2 years ago. My son still talked about that fishing trip like it was the greatest day of his life. We arrived at the party, and my son ran to find his grandfather. I watched him weave through the crowd, the drawing clutched carefully in his hands, his face bright with anticipation. I saw him find my father. Saw him tug on his sleeve. Saw him hold up the drawing. And I saw my father barely glance at it. "Not now," he said. "I'm busy with your cousin." My son's face fell. That expression. God, that expression. I had made that same face 1,000 times as a child. The hope draining away. The smile freezing and cracking. The slow understanding that you are not important enough. But my son tried again. He followed my father around for the next hour, trying to get his attention. Trying to show him the drawing. Trying to matter. Finally, my son approached him one more time. I was close enough to hear this time. "Grandpa," my son said, voice small but determined, "why don't you spend time with me anymore?" My father looked down at him. And without a trace of warmth, he said, "You're already 8 years old. You're big now. Your cousin is still little. He needs more attention." Grandpa told my 8-year-old son, "You're old enough now, the little one needs more attention." The same words he used on me when my brother was born. My son's face crumpled. He ran, not to me, but just away, pushing through the crowd of people who didn't notice a crying child, disappearing through a side door into an empty hallway. I found him sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, the drawing torn in half beside him. He had ripped it himself. He was sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe. I sat down next to him, pulled him into my lap, held him while he cried. I just wanted Grandpa to like my picture, he kept saying. I just wanted him to see it. I could survive being unloved. I survived it my whole childhood. But I won't let my son feel what I felt. Not ever. I dried my son's tears. I smoothed his hair. And I made a decision. We walked back into the party. I found my wife, told her we were leaving. She saw my face and didn't argue. She took my son's hand and headed for the car. I found my father. He was bouncing my nephew on his knee, laughing at something my brother had said. "We're leaving," I said. He barely looked up. "Already? The cake isn't even out yet." "We're leaving," I repeated. "And we won't be coming back." He finally looked at me properly then. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe. Or annoyance. What's that supposed to mean? I wanted to say so much. I wanted to scream at him about 30 years of neglect. About every time he chose my brother over me. About college and cars and houses and love. About watching him do the same thing to my son. About the torn drawing and the broken hopes and the tears. Instead, I just said, "You know what you did." I turned and walked away. No one stopped us. No one followed. Update 1. The fallout begins, 2 weeks later. It's been 2 weeks since the party. I've had time to process, and I want to update everyone who commented with support. After we left, I expected immediate blowback. Angry calls, defensive texts. But there was nothing. Complete silence for 4 days. Then my mother called. I almost didn't answer. My wife was there when the phone rang, and she put her hand on my arm. "You don't have to," she said. But I did. I needed to hear what they would say. My mother's tone was casual at first, like nothing had happened. She asked about my son's school, about my work. Surface conversation. I gave one-word answers and waited. Finally, she got to it. "Your father told me you made quite a scene at the party," she said. "Storming out like that in front of everyone." "I left," I said. "There was no scene. You upset your brother. And your nephew." I almost laughed. "My nephew is 3. He didn't notice we left." "Your brother noticed." "I'm sure he did." Silence. Then, "I don't understand why you're being so dramatic. Your father didn't do anything wrong. He was just being honest. Your son is older. He doesn't need as much attention as a toddler. That's just common sense." I could feel my wife watching me. My grip on the phone was tight enough to hurt. "Mom," I said, "do you remember when I was 8? "What?" "When I was 8. And you and Dad started treating me differently because the baby needed more attention. Do you remember that?" More silence. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." I hung up. The calls increased after that. From my mother, from my father, brief, uncomfortable, demanding, and eventually from my brother. He sent a long text about how I was tearing the family apart, and how our parents aren't getting any younger, and how I needed to grow up and stop holding grudges. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I focused on my son. We had conversations about what happened. Age-appropriate, but honest. I told him that sometimes adults make mistakes. That sometimes people don't treat others fairly, even people who are supposed to love them. That it wasn't his fault. That he was loved, really, truly loved, even if some people couldn't show it. "But why?" he asked. "Why don't they love me anymore?" I didn't have a good answer. "Sometimes," I said, "people have a hard time loving more than one person at once. They think love is like a pie. If they give some to someone else, there's less for you. But that's not how love works. Real love grows bigger the more you share it." "Is your love like that?" "My love is exactly like that." He hugged me tight. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. Update 2. Family pressure, 1 month later. The family pressure campaign began in earnest. Extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Aunts and uncles and cousins reaching out with casual messages that always, eventually, circled back to the situation with my parents. "Family is everything," they said. Life is too short for grudges. Your parents aren't perfect, but they love you. Think of your son. Doesn't he deserve to know his grandparents? That last one made me angrier than any of them. Think of my son. I was thinking of my son. I was thinking of the torn drawing and the tears and the question that still haunted me. Did I do something wrong? I responded to a few of the messages. I tried to explain. But no one wanted to hear it. They had already decided I was the villain in this story, the bitter older son who couldn't let go of the past. The oversensitive one making a mountain out of a molehill. My brother called once. The conversation was brief. You need to apologize to Mom and Dad, he said. For what? For embarrassing them. For making a scene. For ghosting them for a month. They hurt my son. He actually laughed. Dad told him the truth. Kids need to learn that life isn't fair. You're not doing him any favors by coddling him. I hung up. The calls and messages kept coming for another week, then tapered off. I think they realized I wasn't going to be worn down. The flying monkeys retreated. The silence returned. But something else happened during that month. Something good. My wife's parents came to visit. They lived far away and couldn't come often, but they had heard about what happened and wanted to be there. They stayed for 10 days, 10 days of warmth and attention and love that my son had been missing. They took him to the park, read him stories, asked about his interests and actually listened to the answers. They hung his drawings on their hotel room wall and took pictures to keep. They made him feel seen. I watched my son with them, and I saw something change. The anxiety that had been building for months began to ease. He laughed more, relaxed more, started to believe again that adults could be trusted to love him. On their last night, my son hugged his grandmother, my wife's mother, and said, "I'm really glad you're my grandma." She held him close and looked at me over his head, her eyes shining. "And I'm really glad you're my grandson." I had to leave the room. My wife found me in the kitchen, crying into my hands. She didn't say anything. She just held me. Update 3. A letter, 3 months later. 3 months of no contact. The calls had stopped. The texts had stopped. The flying monkeys had moved on to other battles. I was starting to feel something I hadn't expected. Peace. My son was thriving. His nightmares had stopped. His questions about Grandma and Grandpa had become less frequent, less desperate. He talked about my wife's parents instead, about their next visit, about video calls with them, about the care packages they sent. My wife and I had started to rebuild our family structure without the weight of my parents' dysfunction. We were happier, lighter, more ourselves. Then the letter came. Handwritten, from my mother. Pages of it. I read it alone, in my car, parked in the driveway. I couldn't bring it into the house. I couldn't let that energy into the space we had worked so hard to protect. The letter started with guilt. "I don't know what we did to deserve this. Your father can't sleep. We think about our grandson every day." Then came the justifications. "We were just trying to be fair. Your brother's son is so young, he needs extra help. You were always so independent, we knew you'd be okay." Then the denial. "We never treated you differently. You're imagining things. Your brother says he doesn't remember any favoritism either." Then the manipulation. "Life isn't fair and children need to learn that. You're teaching your son to be oversensitive. Is this the example you want to set?" And finally, at the very end, almost an afterthought, "We miss our grandson. Please let us see him." Not, "We miss you." Not, "We're sorry." Not, "We understand why you're hurt." Just, "We miss our grandson." Their access to someone to love. Their source of grandparent photos for social media. Their proof that they were good people, good family members. I sat in my car for a long time. I read the letter 3 times. And then I tore it up and threw it away. Update 4. The test, 5 months later. 5 months in, my mother tried a different approach. She showed up unannounced. I was at work when my wife called me, her voice tight. "Your mother is at the door. Don't let her in." I wasn't going to. "But she's asking to see him." He heard her voice. "He's asking who it is." My heart clenched. I had dreaded this moment. Explaining to my son why he couldn't see his grandparents was one thing when they were absent. Having them show up, in person, forcing the confrontation, that was something else entirely. "Tell her to leave," I said. "I'll be home as soon as I can." By the time I got home, my mother was gone. My wife met me at the door, looking shaken. She cried, my wife said. Stood on the porch and cried and said she just wanted to see her grandson. She said I was keeping her family from her. What did you say? I told her she should have thought about that before she broke his heart. I married the right woman. My son was in his room. I went to him, sat on the edge of his bed. Mom said Grandma was here, he said. Not a question. Yes. Why didn't she let her in? I took a breath. I had thought about this conversation so many times. How to explain hurt to a child. How to tell him the truth without making him carry adult burdens. Do you remember how you felt at your cousin's birthday? I asked. He nodded slowly. His hand crept into mine. Grandma and Grandpa hurt you. They made you feel like you weren't important. And when someone hurts you and doesn't say sorry, doesn't try to do better, you don't have to let them keep hurting you. You can choose to protect yourself. Is that what you're doing? Protecting me? Yes. Because you love me? Because I love you more than anything in this world. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm glad you're protecting me, Dad. Update 5, a card, 6 months later, now. It's been 6 months. Half a year of peace. Half a year of watching my son heal and grow and become confident in a way he never was before. He's happy now. Really happy. The anxiety that had plagued him has faded. He doesn't ask about his grandparents anymore, not with that desperate hope that used to break my heart. When he mentions them at all, it's casual, matter of fact. Just people who used to be in his life. My wife's parents have become his grandparents in every way that matters. They visit every few months. They video call every week. They send letters and packages and love across the miles. My son keeps their picture on his nightstand now, not my parents. He showed me a school assignment recently. Write about someone you admire. He wrote about his grandfather, my wife's father. About how he always listens. About how he remembers things. About how he makes my son feel important. I had to read it twice because my eyes kept blurring. Yesterday, a card came in the mail. From my parents. Store-bought, generic. Inside, in my mother's handwriting, we miss our grandson. Please call us. No apology. No acknowledgement. No change. I showed it to my wife. She looked at me, eyebrows raised, waiting to see what I would do. I threw it away. Final thoughts. Someone in the comments will probably tell me I should reconcile for my son's sake. That grandparents are important. That family is everything. That life is too short for grudges. But here's what I've learned. Family isn't just the people who share your blood. Family is the people who show up. The people who love you on purpose, not by obligation. The people who make you feel valued and seen and important. My son has grandparents who do all of those things. They just don't happen to be my parents. I spent 36 years trying to earn love that was never going to come. I won't let my son spend one more day doing the same. He deserves better. We both do. And finally, I chose us over them. The breaking of the cycle doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in 1,000 small choices. In every time you refuse to make excuses for people who hurt you. In every boundary you hold even when they call you cruel for holding it. In every moment you choose your child's well-being over your desperate, lifelong wish to be loved by people who are incapable of loving you the way you need. I don't know if my parents will ever understand. I don't know if they're capable of it. Maybe one day they'll show up with genuine remorse and a willingness to change. Maybe they'll do the work to become the grandparents my son deserves. But I'm not holding my breath. And I'm not holding the door open while I wait. Some people say forgiveness is about setting yourself free. But so is walking away. So is protecting your child from the pain that shaped you. So is finally, after decades of trying, accepting that some people will never love you the way you need to be loved, and that's not your failure. It's theirs. My son will never wonder if he did something wrong. He will never tear up drawings meant for people who don't deserve them. He will never sit on the floor of an empty hallway, crying, because the adults in his life couldn't be bothered to make him feel valued. He will be loved. Fully. Completely. Without conditions. That is my gift to him. And it is my gift to myself. We both deserve it. TLDR, I was always the unfavored son. When my son was born, my parents briefly became involved grandparents. Then my brother had a son, and my parents forgot my son existed, the same pattern repeating one generation later. At my nephew's birthday, my father told my crying 8-year-old that he was too old, and his cousin needed more attention. I went no contact. 6 months later, My wife's parents have become the loving grandparents my son deserves, and my son is happy and thriving. My parents still haven't apologized. Some cycles are meant to be broken. Here's what I learned about family. It's not just the people who share your blood. Family is the people who show up. The people who love you on purpose, not by obligation. I always knew I wasn't the favorite. I made peace with that. But watching them do it to my son, watching that same pain on his face, I couldn't take it anymore. For 3 years my son was their world. Then my brother's son was born and mine became invisible. The same pattern. The same favoritism. Just 1 generation later. My son asked me, "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby, you didn't. Your grandparents did. They did the same thing to me 30 years ago." Grandpa told my 8-year-old son, "You're old enough now, the little one needs more attention." The same words he used on me when my brother was born. I could survive being unloved. I survived it my whole childhood. But I won't let my son feel what I felt. Not ever. I went no contact. My parents called it overreacting. They said kids need to learn life isn't fair. I blocked them. My wife's parents stepped up. They became the loving grandparents my son deserves. 6 months later, my son is happy, confident, loved. My parents sent a card, "We miss our grandson." No apology. No acknowledgement. I threw it away. I spent 36 years trying to earn love that was never going to come. I won't let my son spend one more day doing the same. He deserves better. We both do. And finally, I chose us over them.